Welcome back to Rad City Resin. Today, I'm getting a little bit vulnerable. As someone who's a card-carrying perfectionist who also suffers from ADHD, sometimes it can be really hard for me to accept when a project doesn't turn out exactly how I imagined it. Maybe the idea just doesn't work out, or it's not quite what I envisioned, and slowly but surely, I'm learning that that's okay. Instead of scrapping the whole thing like I would have done when I was younger, I've been trying to turn those moments into a challenge to create something new and unexpected, instead of just walking away from it before I even gave it a real chance. Before we get started, take a moment to hit that subscribe button. For this week's project, I had this crystal clear vision of what I wanted to do. You see, my amazing husband bought me this gorgeous prismatic Christmas tree. And let's be real, I don't think I've ever felt so seen. Like, this thing was made for me. It's actually perfect. And I really loved the idea of how the lights hit the different angles of the tree and made these gorgeous, brilliant color plays. And I thought to myself, man, that would make a really pretty sun catcher. Like, imagine that outside in the sun. So I did some daydreaming and came up with an idea. To get started, I broke out my favorite resin inclusion, this iridescent plastic wrap. If you're new to my channel, I use this stuff pretty often. This particular item's actually a gift wrap bag that I purchased from a craft store for about $2. I've had it for probably going on a year now, and I still have so much of it left. Excellent investment. So I sliced off a few ribbons that were about 1/4 of an inch wide or so, and roughly about 5 or 6 inches. I have this little light-proof jar that I use when I need to dip something into resin. So I filled it with a bit of resin, and I dipped in one of the ribbons, and then I let it drain off. Then I wrapped it carefully around a boba straw. I wanted a sort of spiral look, so I made sure that it was spaced evenly as it wrapped around. This process is super messy, and you absolutely have to wear gloves, but the outcome looked so cool. I used my UV light to cure the item, and then when it was nice and solid, I unraveled it from the straw. I actually was really surprised by how well this worked. It turned out perfectly. Now, you may see some resin drips or a little bit of excess resin bleed that got cured along the straw, but that was really easy to trim off with scissors, or if it's too thick, you could even use like a deburring tool. I repeated this process with various sizes of straws and even a hot glue stick to make a batch of these. My aim was to have like a little collection of iridescent icicles. Now that I had them, I needed a way to hang them to get that fun sun catcher effect. I poked a hole at the top of each of my spirals, then I used some thin wire to create a hook for each one. I bought this wreath form made of wooden balls from the Dollar Tree, and I used some black acrylic paint to turn the entire thing black. Then I used 3 pieces of twine spaced evenly around to create a hanging system. I had a bunch of these faceted gemstone beads, and I used some wire to drape them around the wreath frame. I was really liking how this looks. It was almost like a little mini golf chandelier. And so my brain was super happy at this point. I played around with how I wanted to hang these spiral icicles, starting with hanging them from the beads and then hanging them from the wreath as well. And ultimately, that's the look that I went with. I took it outside to hang it up in the sun and admire my handiwork and see the glittering shimmers. And I realized I hated it. It didn't look anything like what I was imagining, and at this point, I couldn't even really remember what the original vision was. It kind of stopped at making the icicles. Like, I didn't have a plan for after that. The thing is, I really liked how the wreath frame and the faceted beads looked, so I didn't want to leave it like this and not be happy when I saw it. So I decided I needed to find a way to still use this. I set my project aside for about a day, and then when I came back, I looked at my desk and saw all the little scraps of cellophane everywhere, and then I had another idea. I used this candle to trace 2 overlapping circles to create a crescent moon shape, and I put that drawing underneath my silicone pad, then traced it out with UV resin, and I even filled it in a little bit. I didn't completely fill it in, but just enough to make sure that when I laid out my cellophane that it would stick in place. I slowly added the scraps of cellophane to the resin, not really worrying about getting a perfect shape just yet, just trying to get as many pieces in place before I cured it really well. And I cured it very well from both sides, the top as well as from underneath the silicone pad. Once it was solid, I peeled it away from the silicone pad, and I used the candle lid to once again trace out the shape. Then I cut away the excess cellophane so that I had a nice crescent moon shape made of the cellophane. This next part I did off screen, but I basically just painted the back of the moon black, then coated the entire thing with several layers of UV resin to make sure it was nice and solid and that the paint was sealed in. I drilled a small hole at the top using a hand drill, and I used some of that black twine from before to hang it from the frame. I made sure to kind of drop it down so it would be sort of in the middle of it. I turned the frame on its side for this, and I absolutely love how the faceted beads sort of surrounded the moon, and because they were strung on wire, it really held its shape very nicely. I even used one of the little spiral icicles to hide the twine, so they didn't all go to waste. Overall, I love how this turned out, and it now has a permanent home in my studio. So I hope today's video inspires you to not only try some new resin techniques, but even more importantly, to give yourself some grace. When things don't go right, walk away for a bit, think about it, and then decide what you're not liking about that situation and how you can fix it. Thanks for joining me today. Go make something awesome this week, and don't forget to stay rad. If you liked today's video, go check out my resin tutorial playlist.